The fuck did I just watch? Did he just cut away a $20,000 dinghy? So I came across this video in my Instagram feed, which naturally garnered quite the response in its comments area, and subsequently went to go watch it on YouTube. And I wanted to share some of my thoughts on this situation with you guys.
I think he's not gonna make it.
Okay, firstly, let's take a look at the text associated with the Instagram post, and then we'll jump over to the YouTube video comment section and see some of the insights that we'll find there.
Captains and leaders have the responsibility to make tough decisions, often under the gun. They are focused on the big picture and the safety of those they are responsible for. Anxiety and hesitation arose when sharing this one to YouTube, knowing how much criticism will come from dudes on a couch in a basement with no concept. Between Tony and Danny, they were approaching close to 1 million sea miles combined. I've racked up over 20,000 and I feel pretty proud of that, but just a tiny fraction of the experience of these old sea dogs.
So the first thing I want to address is the fallacy of I have many miles. So I've said many times over the years as both a businessman and as a sailor that it doesn't really matter how many miles you have or what, you know, I'm very experienced at X, Y, or Z, because you could have bullshit experience for 1 million miles, and what does that really count for? For example, you could have racked up 8,000 miles crossing the Pacific while never once having to make a decision and only taking direction from a captain. And that's a whole different ball of wax when you're responsible for the ship and crew and making sound decisions. It's the quality of that experience that really matters. So for example, was it your boat? Did you prepare and correctly equip it? Did you make the navigation choices and decisions? What kind of track record do you have for demonstrating sound judgment in a critical situation and keeping a cool head? What kind of challenges have you had to overcome over the years? And what kind of track record do you have? Versus a track record of making mistakes and poor judgment and groundings and so on. So you could have a lot of miles and many mistakes, or you may have relatively fewer miles and a track record of demonstrating good situational awareness and good sound judgment. Also, dumb luck is definitely a thing. I've met several people who've crossed an ocean who I wouldn't let touch my boat or on my boat with a scrub brush. So, you know, you don't need to pass an IQ test to rack up some miles. So someone can increase their miles, but they can't increase their cognitive horsepower. So having established the first 2 points above, it brings us to this example of this video here. There are some cognitive challenges on display here. And to be fair, in a lot of instances, this boils down to exhaustion. Whatever horsepower you started out with, that will be rapidly diminished by a lack of sleep and the physical strain that's inherent by doing longer passages. It becomes ever more important to slow down and work through a problem methodically. It's clear in this case that they were in a lazy and hurried mentality. Which brings us to our fourth point: slow down. In this case, I mean that both metaphorically and literally. A passage plan in an ETA is a rough outline or guideline for a passage, and ultimately it's going to be the boat and the conditions that dictate how long a passage is actually going to take. In this case, they needed to slow down or stop the boat because the speed of them moving through the water was exasperating the whole issue with the dinghy swinging and smashing into the transom of the boat with all that water rushing through the catamaran's tunnel. A gentleman never sails to weather, and it's apparent in this video that these folks are chopping to windward, heading into wind and seas, and the effort is required to drop sails, slow the boat down or stop the boat, and in many instances, it may have actually been a really wise decision to turn the boat and run with the seas, because when you're heading to windward, you have all that additional force on the boat heading into choppy seas and apparent wind speed. So when you turn the boat around and run with the sea conditions, everything calms down and you can focus on solving the issue at hand. Running with the sea will decrease apparent wind and improve the vessel motion versus bashing to windward. This was their first mistake in addressing this problem. Safety last. No one is wearing a PFD or is tethered. I'd hate to see if their laziness would prevail if they had a man overboard situation. Oh, we don't have time to go back for him, but don't worry, he won't suffer for long. Mechanical advantage. It's difficult dealing with dynamic loads, weight swinging around, and we have limits to our physical prowess. So work smart, not hard. And look, what do we have here? The boom is literally right above this whole davit dinghy situation. So you have this opportunity for leverage right there. Get a block and tackle attached to the end of that boom. Get a line around that outboard and get that weight under control. And or run another line over the sheave of the davit itself, run that back to a winch, and get that outboard, that weight, up and secure it as high to that davit as possible. Preparation is key. You should have things like block and tackle, preventers, spare lines, ratchet straps, etc. at hand for a long passage, just in case of such an instance. I have a pre-delivery passage checklist that I go through to ensure that I have all the things that I routinely have used on previous passages, to make sure that I have those items at hand, things that I've learned through previous passages that I routinely use and know that I will want at hand. I will refuse a passage or refuse a delivery if the boat is ill-equipped in these regards, or the owner is otherwise unwilling to adequately equip the boat with the items that I know I may need on hand. It's my job as the delivery captain to anticipate the conditions and equipment that I will need to keep the crew safe and protect the client's vessel in every conceivable way I can possibly think of. And that's where, in this instance, the captain failed. With the correct items at hand, there's no reason for why they should not have been able to get ratchet straps around the entire dinghy or spare lines around the entire dinghy and get that lashed up high out of the water to the davits where it couldn't be swinging around and couldn't pose the risks that it did. How do I know? Because my wife and I were in this exact situation, only the difference being it was near coastal, so we kind of took the liberty, and in hindsight it was a mistake, but one that we learned from, where we left our dinghy on the davits and we actually had a davit break, and it was the outboard side. And of course the issue with this particular video that we're discussing, it was a little bit of a different situation because they're using a rib that has the outboard secured in a more permanent installation on that rib with throttle controls, because it's a console, like a center console style rib. In our case, it's a detachable outboard, so I have a dinghy harness or a lifting harness on the outboard. So what we did was having a solar arch, similar to like in this situation, they have the boom extending right over top of the cockpit of the catamaran. In our case, we had a solar arch right over the back of the boat, so I had that mechanical advantage. And we took the boom preventer, and which is a block of tackle setup, attached it to the solar arch, and lifted the back of the dinghy by the outboard, the weight, the heaviest part of it, and secured that up high. Wrapped ratchet straps all the way around the dinghy, ratcheted in tight, so the load was controlled. It's no longer a dynamic weight flying around, swinging around. And we were able to complete our passage, which we were about maybe an hour out of port, right? And in worse conditions than what was going on in this video, we were in about 8-foot seas with our dinghy splashing the water. Very similar type situation, but immediately we were able to get that under control by stopping, assessing the situation, looking for the mechanical advantage, securing the dynamic load, when we were fine and our dinghy was fine. Other actions they could have taken, if necessary, had they not been able to lash it up to the davits, would be to attach a painter to it, lower it, and tow it, which is the second worst option, only after cutting a $20,000 dinghy away. A gift to Poseidon, I guess. They could have lowered the dinghy and got it alongside and lifted it up with halyards and secured it on deck in some fashion. Now with that rib, that type of rib, it's very difficult to separate the outboard from the hull itself. So you could fashion up some manner of cradle with spare fenders or other items, and get that thing on deck. And I'm sure the owner would have rather opted to do some gel coat ding repair versus sacrifice his entire $20,000 outboard and dinghy setup. That's a fair bet I would take. With a catamaran that size, they could have maybe even got the dinghy towed behind them and used fenders to roll the whole thing, winch it up, right up the transom and into the cockpit. That catamaran's huge. You probably have real estate there to actually park the entire dinghy right up in the cockpit. And again, you know, the risk-reward scenario there of a couple dings in the deck versus loss of the dinghy. It seems to me that the logic, the rationale of the captain was, oh, we don't want any damage to the boat, so whatever this dinghy is possibly doing, the damage to the boat, it's not worth it, you know. The only argument that could possibly be made would be risk to the crew, right? But it didn't seem to be that much of a concern with the obvious lack of PFDs and tethers and lifelines or anything else being employed in that moment. Prevention. And of course, this whole problem could have been prevented, and they recognized the potential for the problem when the conditions were calm. See, laziness.
How's that dinghy looking? You think it's gonna hold on a little bit longer? Oh, you pooped on the boat.
A little bit extra weight to fall off.
What do you think? Should we rig another lineup, or you think that's gonna hold?
Yeah, I don't know, guys. As long as the weather stays the same, maybe. It's looking a little sad, to be honest.
On passages, when conditions are favorable, this is the time I have used on passages to identify and address potential hazards before conditions can worsen and those potential issues can become a much bigger problem. So, for example, on a passage, on an offshore passage my wife and I did years ago, we had a spreader light come loose. And this actually happened earlier in the passage, in the first day or so, when conditions were still very mild. And it's easy to get lulled into a habit or a certain rhythm on a passage where you're like, you know, I'm comfortable now, everything's comfortable now, I'm going to rest, I don't want to deal with that. And that would have been a mistake. So I ended up recognizing that this spreader light dangling could have potentially separated from the rig and fallen through the pilot house window, or could have somehow become entangled in the main and rigging and prevented us from being able to reef in a critical situation. Both of those possibilities were unacceptable risks to me when I had the opportunity to go up. So did I like going up the rig offshore with the boat swinging around? No, it's a risk, right? But you have to evaluate that risk with the other potential risk of the problem, right? And it's a good thing that we did address it at that time, because later on in that passage, we did encounter winds in excess of 40 knots and huge seas, 15-foot seas. And that was one less problem that we would have had to contend with, when in fact we did have several other problems on that passage to contend with. Our batten cars breaking free of our old main track, the Tides plastic, hard plastic UHMW plastic main track sections were breaking off, and we are having sections of our main becoming detached from the mat. So I mean, there was enough other things to contend with that was one less problem that we didn't have to deal with. So just a little anecdote, for example. So in conclusion, how do you prepare for these types of scenarios if you don't have all that much experience? Well, clearly having 1,000,000 miles is the be-all and end-all of good seamanship. The art of it is in your ability to anticipate the situations and conditions you may encounter and how others have solved similar problems, and consider what you might do in a variety of hypothetical situations. That kind of foresight. Of course, you don't know what you don't know, so training programs like our sailing school or the Nautic Ed curriculum can help prepare you with specific coursework, examples, and resources to help prepare you for scenarios like, for example, if you lost your rig and how to jury rig a sail offshore. The key is finding qualified content by proven organizations and individuals and creators, and being very weary of self-proclaimed experienced sailors with 1,000,000 miles of terrible experience. You are what you eat, so consume quality, qualified sources of content. Take training from well-reputed schools and trainers, and you will develop the skills and habits that translate into excellent seamanship. Thanks again for watching. Visit our website, the link is in the description, and get access to our 2 free sailing courses, the basic sailing course and the rules of the water sailing course. By signing up with us and Nautic Ed, you'll get access to these 2 free courses, a digital logbook, and the ability to create your online sailing resume. So moving forward with your sailing career, the online resume is a key component to tracking your experience, logging your miles towards getting your SLC license or ICC license, which is critical if you're planning on bareboat chartering in many parts of the world. So this is just another tool to help you on your journey with your sailing career. So thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.